On this edition of Sightings, this psychic knew Jenny Allen was going to be murdered within 2 weeks.
I believe Jenny's fate was probably predestined.
But could she change the course of fate?
It's like I knew she was going to die, and there was nothing I could do about it.
Then, these Los Angeles gang members are going straight, and they owe it all to the mystical power of monks.
We introduced the Tibetan culture because the Tibetan struggle to gain independence is a nonviolent struggle, much like Martin Luther King.
Later, psychic Peter James makes dramatic contact with ghosts of Georgetown, Colorado's past.
And he said, I didn't kill him. I didn't kill him, and he's angry. Don't be angry at me.
And Sightings travels to Peru, where alien encounters are on the rise.
Sightings. I'm Tim White. Psychics who claim to have precognition, the ability to see into the future, believe it is a special gift for the benefit of others. If they abuse it by picking winning lottery numbers, for example, they will lose it. Psychic Jeanette McClure claims to have precognition. She tries to use it to benefit others, but in one case, her power to see into the future wasn't powerful enough to change it. It was bitter cold that February day in Allendale, South Carolina, the day a man killed Jenny Allen at point-blank range. Suspicion immediately fell on her brutal husband, Dale. By all accounts, Jenny was a kind and vulnerable young woman, trapped by fear and loathing for a man she no longer loved.
If you said or done something he didn't like, he found a way to get revenge. And he threatened her every day she lived. Not only her, he threatened our whole family.
Although they tried, Jenny's parents could do little to stop the cycle of violence. After she reluctantly allowed Jenny to marry at age 16, Bee rarely saw her daughter because Dale would not allow it. He was controlling and abusive, and it took 16 years of marriage before Jenny finally worked up the courage to ask for a divorce.
What caused Jenny to leave him was he had dug a grave for her and carried her out and held her 3 hours over it and told her he was going to kill her and put her in it. He was going to come on over here and get me. And that's when she decided she had to leave. And that's when she came home.
But things didn't get any easier for Jenny during the 8 months that she lived with her parents. Dale shot up and then set fire to one of the Johns family businesses in Allendale. He vandalized Bee's car and tried to run Jenny's father, Legree, off the road, and he wouldn't let up on Jenny.
Dale sat and stalked Jenny all day. She worked at a convenience store we had. And he would sit and watch her all day. And then he'd call and threaten to kill her.
Jenny knew psychic Jeanette McClure through her sister Jean. Unsure what to do about Dale's escalating threats, Jenny called Jeanette at her home in Athens, Alabama. Jenny didn't know then that she had only 2 weeks to live.
When Jenny first called me 2 weeks before this happened, she asked me if I felt that he really meant to kill her. She had been threatened, and the feeling was very foreboding. I felt that he would really kill her, and I told her so, and asked that she would be very careful for the next 2 weeks. I felt like she should not be by herself at any time, and to always have someone with her. And the last day of the 2 weeks was when it happened. She was shot.
We all tried to go to and from work together and always keep with somebody so that we'd stay out of harm's way.
I don't know what happened, that she didn't have anyone with her that day, that morning.
We felt like now that she was home, we could help her, but it was a hopeless case.
I believe Jenny's fate was probably predestined.
2 weeks to the day after Jenny made her desperate phone call, she didn't show up for work at Bee's Stop and Go. Choked with panic, Her family filed a missing persons report with the sheriff, and then they called Jeanette to see if she knew where Jenny was.
I told them where I felt that she was. It was just like a movie starting to come into my mind. I saw this little white wooden church with bright red doors, and I said that I saw her within 1/4 of a mile of this church, and I saw her by water. But I did feel that she was dead. It's like I knew she was going to die, and there was nothing I could do about it.
Jenny's body was found later that same day, in the very spot that Jeanette had described. But Dale was not arrested. He had an alibi, and so it seemed that Jeanette's psychic impressions in this detail were off the mark.
I asked Jean, Jenny's sister, if she would drive me down the road where they found Jenny. And as we were driving down the road, I asked her not to tell me where it happened, but I would tell her.
Jeanette's request to use her abilities without any outside influences is common among psychics, according to author and psychologist Dr. Joe Slate. Years earlier, Jeanette had studied parapsychology with Dr. Slate.
Many psychics who go into the investigative arena prefer to know absolutely nothing about the case they're investigating. I think in doing that, they are relying almost totally on their psychic powers rather than any interpretation of some data that's already been gathered. And that's the reason it is helpful to become passive and to clear the mind of what I call psychic static and allow the mind to focus purely in a psychical channel.
Walking the road where Jenny drew her last breath, Jeanette had an eerie psychic vision of 2 men, a driver and a shooter, and a 3rd man, Dale, who had hired the killers.
I got a real strong feeling of nausea as I was coming down the road, and I felt that the men were hidden and followed her and caught up with her, and that they shot her. And I felt as I approached this abandoned house and this tree that this is where it happened. This is where the shot was fired that killed Jenny.
Jeanette was right. Mortally wounded, Jenny slumped over and her truck careened off into the woods where it sat all day, motor still running, until a passing neighbor noticed the headlights and discovered Jenny's lifeless body. The information that Jeanette provided to the local police helped them crack the case after more than a year of fruitless leads. The evidence led to a murder conviction for Dale Allen for hiring 2 hitmen to carry out his diabolical plan. And it may never have happened without help from another dimension.
There have been studies to investigate the relationship between psychics and police, and a surprising number of law enforcement personnel contact psychics. And word does get around about these people who are able to come up with very critical information that would lead to the solving of crimes. And Jeanette has established a reputation for doing that.
I plan to continue working with the police and families as long as I'm invited, and that if at all possible I can help them with whatever information or whatever gift I have.
Much of her information seems to come from another dimension. I know many people cannot accept that idea, but even Einstein himself said there are many dimensions. Some we know, some we do not know, and some we can never know. I think Jeanette is interacting with some of those dimensions that Einstein thought we could never know, and that makes her truly a gifted psychic.
But despite her psychic gift, Jeanette's success in this case is bittersweet. Now she turns her attention to comforting the loving family that Jenny left behind.
I talked to the Johns family, and I tried to give them words of comfort that Jenny is at peace now, and that Jenny is still with them in spirit.
According to the Los Angeles Domestic Violence Council, nationwide, a woman is abused by her husband or boyfriend every 6 minutes. Doesn't take a psychic to know that if you think you're in danger, you probably are. There is help available to help you get out.
Next, monks meet gang members. Later, the newest evidence of Martian canals.
It's not ghosts and goblins that are frightening kids in America. It's the specter of violence, poverty, and hopelessness that's invading our homes and hearts. Now, more than ever, we need creative solutions to these problems. And as Sightings correspondent Carla Wohl reports, there is one group that is trying a new paranormal approach.
These are the Gyuto monks of Tibet, their lives dedicated to the metaphysical connection between heaven and earth. For them, peace is achieved through chanting and a special kind of meditation in which they create enormous paintings out of sand, ephemeral tapestries called mandalas. This mandala design is called the Wheel of Compassion, and while they create it, the monks contemplate compassion and peace, attempting to transfer its power into real life. But what about this real life? This is Los Angeles, where 15 children die at the hands of other children every month. Juvenile crime is epidemic, and an aura of hopelessness pervades the inner city. The Gyuto monks have been invited here to teach their path to compassion and peace. But can 6 monks in a mandala affect any real change in this environment?
I got caught selling drugs. Crack cocaine.
Yeah, I always had a gun with me.
I used to steal a lot of cars.
I got arrested for trafficking large amounts of methamphetamines and loaded automatic firearm.
Me and him, we like from revival gangs. He's from a different gang that my gang doesn't get along with. And we like kind of be shooting each other.
We've gotten a couple fights, like me and him, but since the monks, you know, we kind of calmed down and everything. Me and him could talk now. For some reason.
This is where the boys live. Their identities are being protected because of their ages. Camp David Gonzalez is a juvenile detention facility just outside Los Angeles. It takes young criminals off the streets, but it also tries to help the children on the inside. So when the Samaya Foundation, a nonprofit group promoting the relevance of Tibetan spirituality, offered to bring the monks here, the camp accepted.
I guess my question is, how can some monks from Tibet with sand painting teach these kids from the inner city, these gangbangers from the inner city, about nonviolence?
Well, the way they've been teaching them is through the sand painting, finding out that it's not just some paint or a can of spray paint that they're accustomed to seeing. It's actually learning to be patient. They're all striving for one thing, so they're forcing and challenging themselves to channel their energy to something positive, because the mandala is a representation of themselves, their inner self.
We want you to continue developing your pictures to put into the mandala.
Barry Bryant is director of the Samaya Foundation and designed this mandala program, which he calls Healing the Causes of Violence.
We introduce the Tibetan culture because one of the things with children like this, their view of the world is quite narrow. In fact, they don't know anything outside of their immediate neighborhood. So we're introducing a community from absolutely the other side of the world, something just very different from anything that they've ever heard of before. And the Tibetan struggle to gain independence is a nonviolent struggle, much like that of Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi. So this becomes an example for us to talk to the children about nonviolence.
The 6 Buddhist monks of the Gyuto Tantric University spent 1 week working with 51 male inmates. Each session began with chanting, then one-on-one and group discussion, focusing on self-esteem, compassion, and concentration. And then lessons in mandala making, a difficult, highly disciplined blend of art and meditation.
I looked at them like kind of weird, you know, because of the way they were chanting and the way they were dressed. But I started listening to the way they get, you know, the way they sing and the way they talk to each other and get along. And I started thinking like in positive things, like why can't we all get along, the ones that are right here?
Working on the mandala, has that changed who you are?
Well, it changed me a lot, you know. It brought patience to me. Before I had like no patience, I was trying to be in a rush to finish something. And in the mandala, you gotta have real patience to work with the little sands, and probably a lot of patience and calm. I'm calm now.
Many of the boys in the program at Camp David Gonzalez said they were transformed by the experience. Changes that the staff noticed ever since the monks first arrived at the institution.
And going around the facility right now is that indeed there's a different level of rapport between kids and a different level of non-conflict. Maybe it's something, you know, from another culture, another dimension, if you will, that is necessary in order to lead them out of that. Maybe it'll be more successful than some of the things we're trying to do from within the same general culture.
The mandala is the world's oldest religious symbol, but each one is slightly different, reflecting the artist's own personality. Together, the inmates in the program created their own unique mandalas.
When the children are drawing the mandalas, they learn how to actually draw the center of the mandala, which is an 8-petal lotus flower. Then they're instructed to put their protectors into the mandala. And if you look at all the drawings, there's not much variation. Most of them, it's the mother, it's Jesus, it's God. But in the mandalas that you drew, what is besides God, what is the most common thing there?
I'm working with guys that are my enemies from other neighborhoods, and it seems to go all right, you know. Like we don't have no fuss about nothing, and we're working all right all together.
The monks' power to unify a community was also in evidence at this celebrity benefit. It was a meeting of the minds between the Tibetan way of life and civic leaders looking for solutions.
And I can honestly tell you that what is happening tonight here is a blessing for the children of our community.
No one, least of all the inmates, expected that chanting strange syllables, meditating, and putting sand on paper could change them. And yet, it has.
The children have opened up and they're listening to us. When we started, there was just nothing but attitude. And, you know, now they're very engaging with the monks and they're interested in the culture of Tibet. And we've made a lot of progress, and I'm very optimistic.
It is the act of creating the mandala while meditating on compassion that is important. So at the end of the week, the mandalas are destroyed. The sand is swept up, placed in ceremonial vases, and carried to the ocean, where it's offered back to the earth. The monks believe that the water, purified by the sacred sand, turns into clouds that will eventually rain down blessings.
The Samaya Foundation, which sponsored the monks' trip to America, is launching a fundraising campaign. They hope to make their program called Healing the Causes of Violence an annual event.
Next, the message behind alien encounters. Psychics find a downed airliner and rediscovering extinct species.
Here are some of the stories Sightings is following in the news. Since the groundbreaking MIT conference on the alien abduction phenomenon, the focus of new research is shifting. The question is no longer, is abduction real? Now, researchers are studying the message abductees insist that they've been asked to deliver. In Washington, D.C., ongoing UFO research is taking a surprising turn. For some studying unidentified flying objects, it's no longer the mechanics, but the message that's important.
There's some tendency for people to look on UFOs and aliens almost as bringing a supernatural message. One, sometimes, which brings salvation to the human race.
And the link between Orthodox religion and unorthodox sightings extends to the entities as well.
UFOs very much behave like supernatural beings, like angels. In fact, some scholars have compared UFO apparitions to apparitions of angels and saints and the Virgin Mary.
Although Saliba's notion of UFOs as saviors is controversial, many non-traditional religious groups are embracing this new theory.
They come to help us in our struggles here on Earth. And since they are, of course, superior to us, immensely superior to us, they have a lot to teach us.
This new breed of UFO believer is not afraid of the alien abduction experience. Instead, they are seeking it out, making pilgrimages to high elevations to bring them closer to the heavens. And many tell Sightings that contact is being made.
The major belief is that there are other creatures or intelligent beings living outside what we call planet Earth.
Some abductees claim they are returning with warnings of global disasters, messages of peace, and newfound healing powers. Sightings will bring you their stories on an upcoming edition of this program. In the highlands of Tibet, Western researchers have recently discovered a breed of prehistoric horse, long thought to be extinct. This discovery boosts the contention of cryptozoologists like Roy Mackle, who believe there are many more ancient mythic creatures yet to be found.
The fact that reports of other kinds of unidentified animals might refer to real animals is somewhat strengthened. It leads us to at least hope that we might have something really important.
The horses are being called living fossils and were completely unknown to all but a handful of Tibetans living in the remote Ruwachi Valley.
It will also produce further impetus to other groups and other expeditions to look for species of large animals rather than just saying, well, everything's been discovered and there's nothing left to do.
Mackle believes the rediscovery of the Ruwachi horses bodes well for the eventual discovery of another legendary creature, North America's enigmatic Sasquatch, a.k.a. Bigfoot.
These are all evidences or involve all the same kinds of animals which may have survived in isolated areas. Therefore, I have an open mind with regard to the Sasquatch or the Bigfoot.
In Siberia, heavy snow and fog hampered air transport officials' desperate search for an airliner, missing since December 7, 1995, with 97 people aboard. The plane was en route from Sakhalin Island to Khabarovsk on the Siberian mainland when it mysteriously vanished from radar screens. Using helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, and a flotilla of ships, rescuers were unable to find the plane, which was not equipped with a location transmitter. The intensive search covered 14,000 square kilometers. After 5 days, air transport officials enlisted the help of a psychic who envisioned a crash site near the Samarga River. Although viewed with skepticism in most other parts of the world, the use of psychics in search operations is accepted in Russia when other methods fail. On the 6th day, as weather conditions deteriorated even further, the crash site was found along the Samarga River, exactly where the psychic said it would be found. Unfortunately, search teams were too late to rescue any survivors. We'll have more stories from the news next time. Now, here's what's coming up on Sightings.
The spirits are restless in the former silver mining town of Georgetown, Colorado.
The only difference is that the entity here is a little more violent than most of the ghosts in this town.
Later, the newest hotspot for UFO sightings.
For Most Haunted Place in America, Sightings nominates the historic mining town of Georgetown, Colorado. In our ongoing investigation there, historical research is backing up the psychic impressions of paranormal investigator Peter James. When a Sightings team last visited historic Georgetown, Colorado, psychic investigator Peter James encountered an entity he called Edward, here in the attic of Bill Pentland and Becky Richardson's Full Circle Cafe.
Edward, that's your name, Edward?
John was out of
Bill and Becky were sure that Peter had made contact with the former proprietor of their establishment, a man named Edward Shower. But that wasn't the last name Peter was getting.
And I'm Edward B, is all I get so far. His last name has 2 syllables, boom, boom. And it sounds like ridge or bridge or idge.
It seemed that Peter was on the wrong track. Then, a historical researcher provided Sightings with a 130-year-old newspaper account from Georgetown that indicated that there was more than one Edward associated with the Full Circle Cafe. In addition to Shower, there was a notorious hot-headed prospector who frequented the place, a man whose name had an eerie ring, Edward Bainbridge.
There's a John M, the letter M, that I get that apparently was perhaps a friend of his or some place where he went frequently with John or he hung out with John. He's asking me for some fish. Fish? A can?
On April 24th, 1867, Edward Bainbridge sat down at John Mickle's saloon for a game of poker. The stakes? A can of smoked oysters.
What he's saying essentially is that he was accused of something that he didn't do, and there was a man whose name was Jim or James, and he said James was an SOB, and he made me angry.
Edward Bainbridge lost the poker game to a man named James Martin. Bainbridge was outraged and shot Martin in the head.
But there's something around his neck, and he also talks about being around some rocks. I don't know what that means, but he's around some rocks.
An angry crowd of Georgetown vigilantes apprehended Bainbridge and took him to a spot called the Point of Rocks, where he was hanged by the neck.
And he said, I didn't kill him. I didn't kill him, and he's angry. Don't be angry at me.
Amazingly, James Martin, the man presumed to have been murdered by Edward Bainbridge, survived the shooting.
Doc has my body, and he put it on display, and he's calling him an SOB. This is a volatile entity, by the way.
As a final injustice, Bainbridge's body was dug up and sold to a doctor in nearby Central City, where his skeleton was kept on display.
What I get is the reason why he's here is because he wants us to know that he was accused of something that either didn't happen or he didn't do it. And until that's made public, he's not going to rest.
Peter James claims that he had no knowledge of local history before his trip to Georgetown. And yet, it was with uncanny accuracy that he also identified several historical figures haunting this Georgetown establishment.
A lot of strange things would happen at the market. The mining, the hardships.
And there was nobody there. I go in the kitchen.
A lot of them are still here, and, you know, they're supposedly still protecting their gold and stuff.
The miners, for the most part, did their work up in the hills, and then on weekends they'd come down to town, and Georgetown typically had its fair share of saloons. It had a red light district, discreetly zoned on the other side of the creek.
I'm sure it was discreet, but we had a lot of politicians even come up here. I think this was kept quite quiet from Georgetown. Many of the politicians would leave their wives at home and come up here to do business.
Sheila Carbone is restoring this historic turn-of-the-century house on Brownell Street, once part of Georgetown's infamous red light district. And according to Sheila, there's at least one former tenant here who just can't seem to move on.
I was just aware that I was not alone in the house, that there was someone else in the house with me and my family.
Sheila feels that it was her family's restoration work that brought out the supernatural forces, and they were angry.
I was at the kitchen sink, and I have 2 shelves in a window in the kitchen with 3 brackets on each side. These are not shelves that could just fall down. And they came flying out into the kitchen and broke on the kitchen floor.
After some historical research, Sheila uncovered a dark secret haunting this house. The tragic story of a teenage prostitute who had committed suicide after much heartache and despair.
I believe that the ghost is in the bedroom that I have not finished yet. I'm redoing the house, and that bedroom I just keep putting off. It's like that's her territory. I'm almost invading her privacy over there. I would say that she's very young. I believe that she was pregnant and that she was in love with someone. I believe that she worked this house as probably one of the ladies of the evening, and she became pregnant by a young miner, and he was killed in some kind of a mining accident.
The details of the haunting here, the flying shelves, mysterious footsteps, are not common knowledge in Georgetown. So when Peter James entered this paranormally charged environment, he could not have known these facts, nor the history of the teenage prostitute, nor the mining accident. And yet, his accuracy was stunning.
This room has quite a history. I feel like she looked out this window a lot looking for the love of her life and other gentlemen that she entertained. She tells me that her name was Maggie, Margaret, Maggie, and that she was a lady of the night, and she fell in love with a man whose name begins with a J or G. I think it's John, and I believe that he died in a mining accident or where a mine collapsed. And I do believe that she was pregnant, and she could not handle the fact that she was left alone with the oncoming birth, that she committed suicide in this very room. and she died tragically. So the bottom line, there's a very tragic, romantic link to this house, and she keeps expecting John to come back, but he's not coming back. So she went with him. In my opinion, Georgetown happens to be a very highly concentrated area of hauntings. I think the entire town is haunted. So the activity here is probably no different or no greater than perhaps the building next door. The only difference is that the entity here is probably a little more demonstrative or more violent than most of the ghosts in this town.
Living and working in a haunted house, in a haunted town, is no obstacle for Sheila Carbone or the hundreds of other Georgetown residents who relish their unique place in the time-space continuum that seems to exist here.
I have a unique location in Georgetown, so it's a lovely house to be in. I like it very much. I think I'm never alone here. I have lots of company.
Despite a series of frightening encounters, Sheila says that she's very happy in her Georgetown home and has come to feel privileged that she's the go-between in a paranormal love affair.
Next, he's Peru's leading UFO experiencer, and he believes ancient visitors have been coming to his country for centuries.
Recently, a sightings team traveled to South America, where we investigated several claims of paranormal activity. In Peru, ancient mythology is filled with legends about flying ships and alien visitors with secret knowledge. And there is evidence that these legends may have a basis in fact.
I believe that within the recorded history of mankind, particularly in Peru, there has been an interaction with the intelligence behind the phenomena commonly called unidentified flying objects.
For thousands of years, this place has been a sacred place, a place recognized by different ancient cultures. This is also an area where many sightings of UFOs have been recorded. It is an area which is frequented by these types of contacts, and these encounters have undoubtedly been occurring since time immemorial.
Peru's premier UFO researcher challenges the idea that alien visitation is a new phenomenon, born during the American saucer craze of the late 1940s. Sixto Paz believes that extraterrestrials have been making contact for thousands of years, and Peru is where they came first.
When you reach the desert in the south of Peru, you see big lines and large designs that can be seen from space. Maybe contact with extraterrestrials gave our ancestors a reason for creating them. These designs were like an offering or a way of demonstrating that there was a connection to something high above.
Some researchers believe that the ancient Peruvian legend of the god Viracocha may have been based on a real person, a person from another planet. According to legend, Viracocha emerged from the ocean, not far from the place where we find the Nazca lines. From there, he traveled throughout South America, teaching science, engineering, and art. After his work was done, Viracocha is said to have departed from Chilca, Peru, on a flying cloak.
The god Viracocha came to that very place, to the ocean right opposite Chilca, and sank into the sea. It was thought that this is the very place the gods make their home. What we do know is that today many of the people living in this area experience frequent sightings of objects that come out of the ocean.
We were walking towards the ocean, and at the edge of the horizon of the sea, there was a light that kept on growing and growing and growing and passed over us like a flash at a tremendous speed.
Chilca is a spiritual center and a gathering place for UFO experiencers who believe that the same phenomenon that brought Viracocha here is still occurring.
Here in Chilca, I saw a ship descend with my very own eyes. I saw it land behind some hills. The ship was shaped like a hat. I was able to observe its lights. The strongest colors were yellow, red, and orange.
William Gomez is a leading Peruvian UFO researcher. Like Sixto Paz, Gomez and his group use meditation techniques to make contact with what they believe are extraterrestrial visitors.
What I have been able to understand from them in several messages that our group has received is that the vibrations emanating from us here at Chilca are what makes it possible for them to come here and interact with us.
You start to feel when they want to communicate with you. It might be in an apparition, in dreams, or other manifestations. We get together in a group and do exercises, breathing, relaxation, concentration, and meditation.
These groups believe that they have made contact on many occasions, but in recent memory, none was more significant than the encounter of January 31st, 1987.
Approximately half an hour after we started meditating, we were in a relaxed state. We saw an orange-colored cloud hovering above the group. It was a very bright light, very bright.
Frente nuestro, encima de unas colinas.
In front of us, on top of several hills, there was clearly a craft. It was stationary. At that moment, Sisto asked us to keep supporting him with meditation while he ventured further into the desert.
Eyewitnesses claim that after Sixto Paz approached the UFO, he disappeared.
The spacecraft beamed light into the desert, which formed a sort of pulsating golden half moon. From inside appeared a silhouette with arms outstretched. I understood they were telling me to approach them. Once I entered the light, I felt like my whole body was burning up. It was so intense, I had to close my eyes. But what I could see, what I could observe, was that this craft seemed to have entered the sea, and at some enormous depth, there were huge ships. According to them, the motherships had landed at the bottom of the ocean.
Sixto's contact with UFOs might be written off as pure fantasy if it were not for a series of U.S. government reports confirming numerous UFO sightings off the coast of Peru.
We find that in the waters off the coast of Central and South America, both in the Atlantic and the Pacific, that there are numerous reports of UFOs going into the water. Definitely something is going on in the waters off the coast.
Clifford Stone has been documenting UFO encounters around the world for more than 2 decades.
We haven't been able to recognize what their agenda or plan is for planet Earth. But I do believe that there is definitely a desired interaction between them and mankind as a whole on this planet.
After 21 years of contact that we've experienced, it's always been positive, and all the cases we've researched have had positive intentions.
The beings we've contacted are very friendly. One can say they have an older brother attitude towards us, and they're trying to, in a way, make sure we don't make the same mistakes they have probably made in the past with their civilization. They're trying to make us aware that our planet is beautiful and that we must care for it for the future.
Ever since I was a small boy, there was a curiosity in me, deep inside, that there could be life on other planets. And also, I was sure there would not be negative beings. That they had to be coming to Earth for some positive reason.
During our trip to Peru, we received information from several sources about a Peruvian Air Force pilot who had tailed and then fired on an unidentified flying object. The military authorities in Peru have not cooperated so far with the sightings investigation into the incident.
Next, the latest high-tech images of Mars lend support to a very old theory.
Lines have come out that look very much like the canals.
In 1877, Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli announced that he had found seemingly man-made canals on the surface of Mars. But by the 1920s, his startling discovery had been completely discredited. Now, more than a century later, new high-powered telescopes are seeing the canals again. In Florida, astronomer Don Parker is using photographic telescopes and computer enhancement to create a provocative new look at Mars. Parker's images are generating a lot of controversy because of these features, which resemble the so-called Martian canals, dismissed as bunk more than 50 years ago.
Don Parker, in some cases, has pushed the resolution on them by very strong processing methods that you can do with these electronic pictures. And in some cases, lines have come out that look very much like the canals.
The belief that an elaborate system of canals exists on the surface of Mars began with Schiaparelli, but was popularized by American astronomer Percival Lowell, who proposed a startling theory about the creation of the Martian canals, and his observations made headlines.
Lowell was the major proponent of the idea that the canals might be artificially made by intelligent beings. And he spent a great deal of his time trying to sell this idea to both the scientific community and the general public. He thought that there were Martians.
For the past 30 years, astronomer Leonard Martin has been curator of the original observatory built by Lowell in 1894 in Flagstaff, Arizona. Many of Lowell's original papers, sketches, and calculations are stored in this underground vault.
This is one of Percival Lowell's original Mars logbooks that he used at the telescope. And these are the original sketches that he made after his observations. If you look closely on them, you can see what Lowell considered canals. And these sketches then were transferred later on to these Mars globes, which are a real treasure of Lowell Observatory.
As bigger and better telescopes were built and failed to capture Lowell's Martian canals, his theory fell out of favor. And when Mariner 9 took the first close-up pictures of Mars, it seemed that Lowell's canals were gone forever.
Lowell was a keen observer. However, he was straining his eyes to see these things that he thought he saw. He pushed himself a little too far.
Nearly all modern astronomers reject Lowell's theory of artificially constructed canals on Mars. However, Percival Lowell's influence as a scientific pioneer is still felt.
Well, I think that any search for life has to include Lowell as a player, because Lowell created a lot of interest in the possibility of extraterrestrial life. And so our search using SETI is part of that. And certainly his influence is felt and always will be.
The Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona is open to the public year-round and boasts a brand new visitor center where everyone is welcome to explore the oldest observatory in the West.
Ghosts, UFOs, the unexplained, dramatic stories of the paranormal from the files of Sightings, a new paperback book available now wherever books are sold, from Fireside Books.
Until next time, remember, no mystery is closed to an open mind. For Sightings, I'm Tim White.